proud, liberal, well thought out people. And we have this image of us. And we have this image regarding people of color that somehow it goes like this. Well, you know, it might not be very good for people of color up here, but, you know, things were a lot worse in Chicago. Or things were a lot worse in the South. And we believed that. And we went out year after year believing that somehow that, well, it's better for people of color and poor people up here in Madison because we're such a loving, wonderful community. And, well, back in 1940, we're the best place in America to live. Why would anybody want to live anyplace else? And then came the sort of stunning understanding that we're not as good as we think we are. In fact, we're one of the worst in the country in many areas. And it was hard for me to really stomach. So I guess I get my incentive from one of the great prophets in the Abrahamic tradition of Micah. You know, what does the Lord require of us? You know, to do justice, to love kindness, to work humbly before God. And if we do that, we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble. Right now, you're just cruising for trouble. So why do police matter? Well, police matter because they have so much power in our society. They have more power than the president. They have more power than the Supreme Court. Tremendous amount of power. In a diverse culture as ours in this nation, Greek diversity, cultural diversity, racial diversity, it is absolutely important to have one group of people that would model the important values that we think are important, such as the Constitution, that we all have a right to certain things. In fact, the founders talked about our inalienable rights. It's pretty powerful. Inalienable rights. Among those, life, liberty, and then that strange phrase, pursuit of happiness. This is not Bhutan. You know, we thought about this many, many years before, that somehow we should be happy with our laws and the way in which we live together. So I have been writing a blog now for 5 years. In 2012, I wrote the book Arrested Development because I was so concerned by the lack of forward progress that I saw when I left policing. And it was the veteran police chief sounds out about protest, racism, corruption, and the 7 steps necessary to improve our nation's police. And then I started blogging on this. And so I read this blog, improvingpolice.wordpress.org. There's 600 and some posts. If it's good for nothing else, for any criminal justice student that want to write a paper on something, they can get into that blog real quick and write it, I think, acceptable. So I addressed a lot of issues about leadership, about improvement, about quality. And then, lo and behold, a couple years ago, we had a shooting off of Williamson Street. And then we had another one just about a year ago. And I think we all started to ask the question, well, how does that happen? What's the policy? Why are police doing this? And then we had Ferguson happen in between those two things. And people started thinking, who are these police? Who are these police that come to work in the city? It must be strange. Ferguson must be a very strange place because they have police coming from outside, and there doesn't seem to be many of them educated, and there's not many people of color in the police department, and there's very few women, and they kind of come and go in the city, and the Justice Department says, well, it's a revenue mechanism. The police in Ferguson began to see people of color as sources of revenue rather than people to be served. And if that doesn't sound like Jim Crow to you, nothing should. So then I thought, well, when that came out, I said, one suburb, St. Louis County, I wonder how many other places. And before I got thinking of that, we had time came about 6 other areas around the country, the same thing. Unrepresented police departments, same kind of problems. So then we have the video camera breakthrough. Well, police must be really bad because all of a sudden now we're getting all these videos. Probably the most egregious one was certainly in North Charleston, literally an execution of a black man running away from police. And then we've seen them again and again and again in various spots. So one side of the argument says, and they say this to me when they don't like what I say, they say, well, things were a lot rougher today than they were when you were the chief of police. And I say, well, let's look at that. More police officers killed in the 1990s than there even now. So what's going on? What's going on? How did this happen? Well, let me throw some ingredients. 9/11, nation under attack. A bunch of Saudi Arabians run into our buildings and we attack Iraq. How does that work? So we've been in war now for some 10 years. And we have a sense of fear out here. We see this growing fear and knee-jerk reactions against people who are Muslims. And we see the police worried about attacks, and we see mine-resistant vehicles on the street, and we see the change in the police uniform to be more kind of like military. And we see a lot of shootings going on, and we see the justification to a 1989 Graham v. Connor Supreme Court decision that said to police that if you fear that we're not going to get into the minds of police officers, if they use deadly force, if they feel they're afraid, that's justified in the civil area. And then that became the policy and the training emphasis for thousands of police departments, some 17,000 of them in America. So year after year, there used to be a thing called street survival. And I quit allowing police to go to those seminars because one of them involved an officer walking in a park and a little old lady wheeling along a baby carriage. And when the officer passes the baby carriage, the elderly lady takes the gun out and shoots the police officer. So if you hear every day that they are out to get you, then you get pretty defensive year after year after year. And the data simply do not support that. In fact, if you look at all the police that are killed in the line of duty in a year, half of them have been killed in a traffic accident, and half of those were not wearing seatbelts at the time. So if we're really interested in improving police officer safety in the United States, then they should do like we did in Madison, require that police officers wear safety belts when they're driving their automobiles. This last week, we did a great conference down in Platteville. And a couple of friends of mine, we put this program on to look at 21st century policing, taking a look at the President's Task Force report that came out this year, seeing which ones apply to police and ways in which we can implement this. And I brought in some outside people so they wouldn't say, well, it's just that crazy Couper talking. He doesn't know what it's like because he's been retired for 20 years and things are a lot tougher. So we had this captain from Kalamazoo, and one of the things he said, you say that we could have policies more restrictive than the law. So we used to chase a lot of stolen vehicles around the city, and the city said, we don't want you to do that anymore. It's too dangerous. People are getting killed, people are getting run over, nobody should do that. And we listened to them, and then we stopped. We changed the policy. We don't chase speeding cars anymore. And people aren't killed as often. But the Michigan state law certainly permits police to chase cars. And just like years ago in Madison, when I came here, we said, we're not going to shoot fleeing, non-dangerous felons. Because a lot of the fleeing, non-dangerous felons are kids who are joyriding, juveniles who are breaking into buildings and stealing things. Anybody that's committed a crime can be shot by police. That was the state law. And we said, well, that's not right. So we put a policy in. And the police said, well, we should be able to shoot those people. That's our right to do that. And I said, well, no, I don't think the community wants us to do that. You're not going to shoot people in those situations. And we didn't. So what's going on now? Well, there's a certain mentality. People say, well, you've got to change the training, you've got to change the policy. But what we really have to change is the attitude. And why police matter is the attitude. The attitude of what their job is. The further police are from the communities in which they serve, the more dangerous to you they are. But that's all there's to it. It's just simple. And we're at this fork in our road right now where we can either field a police department that is committed to working with citizens, working in those communities, understanding the communities, understanding the diversity of communities, controlling their use of force, educated, honest, well-trained, and willing to work with those communities, and we will have a much better nation. Because police in those communities will be focused on serving those people whom they are assigned to. And they will understand that the safety in their community, their personal safety, is based on how well they do that. Now, I learned this as a young cop in the civil rights movement in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dangerous place during those times. In Detroit, people were sniping and killing officers. Dr. King had gotten killed. The area in which I worked was burning up. And I was able to convince my captain that I want a foot beat down in this area. And he was a bright guy. He said, oh yeah, okay, let's try that out. I said, we have to connect. We just can't go night after night, call after call to problems in the black community. We've got to start some relational things. So I worked down there on foot, and I learned that I was very, very safe in that community because I was committed to being respectful to everybody there, that I was committed to obey the law if I had to enforce the law, and that it is all about communication. Because if police want to be safe, then they better learn their relational skills. They better learn how to de-escalate, how to manage conflict. Because their best weapon is their brain, not their gun. And that's a reality. Now, if we don't go that way, the other way is the way that I think we're going right now, and that is, let's get more mine-resistant vehicles. Let's get more body armor for the police. Let's get more automatic weapons. Let's get more SWAT teams out there, and we're going to control this community. And police doing that in a democracy doesn't work any more than it does in Iran or Afghanistan or any place. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. If you're outside the community, and you're not accepted in the community, you're not going to do your job. Now, what I argue to police is when you relate to the community and you're working on community goals, they're going to help you and you're going to be very effective. Because guess what? Most people don't want crazy people with guns, with drug addicts in their communities. They want safe communities for their kids. And when the police are part of that effort, the job is a lot. I think, guess what? They're also safer. And that goes way back to the early 1980s. It was when there was a lot of money for research. The foot patrol experiment in Flint, Michigan, found out that officers who worked alone on foot were safer than officers who worked in automobiles. So, well, why is that? Because you're running around in a metal cocoon, going from call to call, or do you walk up and down the street talking to people, finding out what the problems are, helping the community meet its objectives. It just works a lot easier that way. So, that's about my 2 cents for now, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So the question is, what do you want to talk about? And if you don't tell me, I won't know. So I'm not going to go on anymore thinking what you might want to hear.
What do you think about the idea of a police kiosk in troubled neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, that's an old idea. I saw those when I was in Japan a few years ago. You know, what were they called? Kobans, they're called Kobans. And actually, police officers lived in those areas. They have a small place there, they have their spouses there, they have the kids there. They're related, connected with the community. That's a good idea.
Could you sort of repeat? I mean, I didn't understand even what the question was.
Pardon me?
I didn't understand what the question was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Repeat a little more.
So he's talking about, what about police in Japan where they have these kiosks, I said kobans, where they're very connected with the community. And they actually, police officers.
Rather than having a station where you have to walk in the door, you have them at information booth where people can walk up to the policeman.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and it
Well, what's that one that's down there now in the square?
I don't.
That's just a city information.
City information, yeah, well, it could be police information.
Right, and you can have.
This is the problem across the street that the city's talking about? Well, maybe police should move down there.
Right,
Get to know
but not
people.
instead of a building or a car.
Yeah, another station. Yes?
I'm sorry to do this, but I'd like to ask two kind of uncomfortable questions.
Okay.
So we're in a place where we read the Bible and there's a commandment, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
How can we allow any human being to walk the streets with a gun with the idea that they can, if they feel they perceive danger, that they can shoot to kill? I think that's not biblical, that's not scriptural, that's not moral. I would not choose to have anyone protect me to have that right. That's question one. Question two, and I'm again sorry to ask this, but we talk about the problems in Madison. We've been in Madison a long time, and I look at all these lovely people at the composition of this room. It's not a very diverse group, and yet within this church, you have other people right now who are of color. Why are we not together discussing this and thinking?
Well, that certainly is a theological as well as a community question, yeah. I mean, why are churches, was it Dr. King talked about the most segregated time in America is 11 o'clock on Sunday. Why is that? What have we done to bridge those separatist movements we have here? I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I certainly suffer that, and as a clergy person, I suffer that myself. My church in North Lake and Waukesha County is pretty non-diverse, and takes how do we break through that? And that's, I think, a challenge of every community of faith is how do we do what at least I think Paul talked about, how do we become one in Jesus for those of us who are Christian? How do we incorporate the fullness of God in all our congregations? Yeah. And this whole life issue. I mean, the same thing about capital punishment. That if it's going to be pro-life, then it's got to be can't be picking and choosing. Let's be pro-life. And of course, handgun violence is an embarrassment to many of us in this country that we continue these shootings, and we have a Supreme Court that I mean, not a legal scholar, but it sounds to me they were talking about states having regulated militias, kind of like the National Guard and stuff. It was okay for that. You didn't just have a federal army. You could have local militia. And how that turned out is that now I get to carry a gun to church, and maybe I get to carry it to Walmart, and I can help people out. If there's a shoplifter, I can shoot somebody who's running away, and it just gets so bizarre. And of course, that whole handgun thing creates a sort of an atmosphere of fear, and that gets police thinking about, everybody out there trying to kill me, and everybody's got a handgun. So therefore, that tends to impact the way in which they talk and interact with other people, even though 97, 8, 9% of what they do is relational and not having to use force against somebody. The nature of the job is such. So as one of my friends, he said, this reasonable objectiveness of the Graham v. Conard decision, doesn't trump the overall aspects of the Constitution. Do you have a question? He's looking up the talking stick, yes.
Yeah, we'll pass that microphone around so everyone can hear. I just want to make one short thing, just that we can bridge the gap somewhat, I believe, through the mentoring programs in the K-12 school, in the Madison schools, that found that to be a nice way to get to know more diverse community, but especially socioeconomically. But my question is, how open do you feel the Madison police force is to this idea of, having that better relationship with the community, the diverse community in Madison, and doing more of the walking the streets and things like that?
Well, I would hope they're open to that, but I mean, that's what they do. I mean, that's what we did for many years. We still have neighborhood officers, but that's got to become not just a part of the program. It's got to be, as the President's Commission, it's got to be, the way of policing has to be this community orientation. Everybody has to have a geographical area which they're responsible for, and that would really greatly help out very, very much. But, the problem, and I've told this to Noble Ray, and he remembers the day in which, the week I'm retiring or turning things over and everything, I said, Noble, you know what the data are here. Half of all the people we're arresting are people of color. And, one of us is going to have to answer for that one of these days. So the answer that I have for this is a very uncomfortable answer for police. After all this stuff is done, the President's Commission is implemented, we've got officers who are working with the community, officers who are better educated, officers who are respectful to a fault, unconditional respect, makes a big difference, and extremely controlled in their use of force. Even after all those things are implemented, there needs to be an apology. There needs to be an apology. I was in South Africa a few years ago for the World Council of the World Parliament of Religions, talking with people who were part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If they can do it in South Africa, if they can do it in Rwanda, if they can do it in Nickel Mine, Pennsylvania, maybe we can do it in America. And of course, that's hard. If you had said that to me 20 years ago, I would have, what do I have to apologize for? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a good cop. Why the apology? The apology is because the police are part of a system of domination in this country. That is, the police exist to keep people that you don't want from your backyard. You see that in nice, high-income areas. They got little fences around them, right? And they hire a guard, and they check people in and out, and they don't have any burglary problem at all. Of course, they got a big problem with diversity, but they just don't have that kind of problem. And what does that mean? What does it say about a community that's got a wall around it and an armed guard at the gate who lets you in after they call someone? It's like having a doorman in your own house. So I think that not realizing this, the police have fallen into this trap. And the trap started the war on drugs. Just the term war. That we use a legal mechanism to address a medical problem. Yes, we did. How many people, other than a few people I don't even know if they did the tobacco companies, but for the most part, we don't smoke anymore. I'm an old guy. We were here, everybody would be smoking here 30, 40 years ago. Pass some cigarettes here. How do we do this with 2 people going to jail? So it seems to me that what we have to do is to try to look at the medical issues as medical issues, and that has to do with mental illness, because the police, in many cases, are the first responders to people who are mentally ill. And since the deinstitutionalization that went on in the 70s, late 60s or so, there's a lot of people who are deemed by law not to be a danger to themselves or others. But they're very disturbing people sometimes. They get in your face, they're just irritating. And we just like, get them off the street. Just get them out of here. Can we just move them over here? Can you get them off the benches here? Maybe we should ticket them for being on the bench. Maybe we should have parking meters for the benches or something. Get them moving along. We're going to help them. But the people that respond to that are the police. They're not mental health workers. But my point is that police need to be competent mental health workers. And then when we look at this whole deadly force thing, because I think that this is a question. I wrote about it I'm going to write about it. And the question, what I hear from people who have mentally ill children, for people who have drug-addicted children, for people who have children of color, is this: what are you going to do to stop killing us? That's the question. The question across America to the police is, what are you going to do to stop killing us? And I don't have the answer to that. Well, a lot of defensiveness, but more than that, silence. So if police chiefs were interested in leading their communities, we would hear them getting together and saying, we need to make a statement here about this, and we're going to change these things which are causing us to forcibly shoot a lot of unarmed people who are resisting us or maybe not obeying our commands. And we've got to do something when a mentally ill person has a sharp or a blunt instrument in their hand, not to have to shoot them to stop the situation. I think it just ought to be unacceptable. You must stop shooting people who aren't immediately dangerous to you. But see, if you look back into what police have learned by this, is the infamous 21-foot rule. The 21-foot rule came out in the 1980s with no evidence at all, saying maybe a couple of test runs. If a person is 21 feet away from you and has a knife, that person can stab you before you can shoot and kill you. So thousands of police go on the street every day, seeing a guy with a knife and saying, this guy's going to kill me in any moment. One step towards me, and he's dead. And that's what usually happens. But then by that time, there's a bunch of police around, and they not only shot once, but shot, maybe 20 or 30 times. Sometimes that happens. And that's false information. Because I'll tell you one thing, just saw a great video the other day of some British police. All right, here is a guy on the street, black man in London, he's got a knife. The police are all around there, and they're trying to distract him and everything. And this goes on for, actually the officers have taken garbage can covers as shields. and they're trying to control this guy until somebody finally comes up with a pepper spray and leaning over the garbage can cover, sprays the guy, and then they all jump on him and take the knife away. And no dead body. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Of course, they're not armed, so they're not always ready to pull a gun out. Other questions or comments?
David, just to follow up on that, one of the explanations that was given for the fatal shooting of Tony Robinson was that the officer was afraid that he would get control of his gun.
Yep.
And what would you think of the idea if patrol officers in Madison were unarmed?
Well, I've said this over the years of my career, so I'm willing to take my gun out, but I want all those crazy people to take off theirs too. But one thing could be done about the gun situation, about being, because that's a usual argument, that's almost like a classic argument. I was afraid I'd be disarmed, because that is in every encounter. So why aren't women police shooting people right and left? Because they're not as strong as people they're coming into contact with. See, very little shooting by women across the United States. Right? Check on that. But there are things called smart guns. And I understand that New Jersey has a law that's saying any guns 2016 has to be a smart gun. A smart gun is a gun that uses various technologies so that you're the only person that can pull the trigger. So that your 2-year-old son who wakes up from his nap getting the gun that you put under your pillow that's fallen on the floor and has watched television, goes bang bang and shoots his mother. That can't happen. No babies can have hand imprints on them. But there are other ways, metallic ring, there's all kinds of ways, and so the person who owns the gun can only be the person who discharges it. So at least you respond to that argument. I've given up on the idea that, maybe I shouldn't, that we can disarm America. I think it's just too crazy, and any politician that tries to do that, but should there be a movement, I'll be one of the first guys to jump on the bandwagon. It's not that you have to give up your long rifles and things, all the sporting, just let's get rid of the handguns. The handguns, as I told police years ago, are the ones that are killing them. It's the handguns that are killing you. Not the shotguns, not the long rifles. You see them coming, you can run and get cover. It's the handguns. It's the concealed weapon. It's the gun that's pulled out here when I go to reach for my wallet and I get shot. Can everybody hear me all right? In the back row, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Louder?
Barely.
Please got the talking stick.
I have a little different question. It's my understanding that a person is convicted of a misdemeanor, they're still allowed to vote, is that correct?
Misdemeanors, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering about the possibility of the jails, people being able to vote when they're in jail, you know, if they have a misdemeanor.
I think states have different laws on that.
Yeah,
Some states even restore it to felons. I think there's some states that after so many years restore the vote to felons.
In this state, you can vote if you've had a felony as long as you've served your whole term, you're not on probation anymore. But I believe that if you have a misdemeanor, you can still vote even if you're on probation. But I'm wondering about the possibility of people actually having a voting station in a jail. And so that people with the misdemeanors could vote when they're in jail. I suppose that would bring down a lot of public approbation, but it sounds to me like it would be a good idea because I think that I went to training recently and
Well, it'd be a really good question to ask the sheriff, especially during the voting year.
yeah.
The problem, the other thing I've really thought about is this idea of, well, and I have certain couched myself in this thing because I had tenure during the 20 years I was here. I could do a lot of things, even though each and every mayor I served for, I believe there was a time in our relationship that he wanted to fire me, including the present mayor. But nevertheless, I began to rethink that because as citizens are starting to marshal up here and requesting things from police chiefs who are appointed by mayors, nothing really has to happen, actually. So I'm kind of in the process of rethinking about whether or not that police chiefs in this society should be elected. I mean, would that help things along? I don't know. But certainly the sheriff in every community is the chief law enforcement officer. And a lot of these questions should be asked to the sheriff because he is the chief law enforcement officer and ask him these questions.
I've got kind of a statement and kind of a question. You patrolled the main streets of Minneapolis, went to a neighborhood and got invested in the neighborhood like a neighborhood officer, went to Burnsville as a police chief, came to Madison, had some resistance, but you made change. Today we have cops with college degrees, people that are highly educated. The police tactics did change, but my question is, is law enforcement responds to the needs of the community. You as a police chief set policy and run the department, but you respond to the needs of the community. What can the community do to try to get the law enforcement people to change the elements of deadly force, to change how they respond to calls for service? Because you made some comments about the 21-foot rule, which in my opinion is crap, because all it is a theory. It doesn't mean that I can't use some dialogue or use a stick to stop somebody with a threat. And I certainly believe that deadly force should be the very last option. But police chiefs across America have a tendency to write policy, set training standards, contrary to what the citizens who they work for want. What can we do as a society to get people to police us the way we want it? Because law enforcement, to me, doesn't just enforce the law. They're peacekeepers, and they keep my community safe so I can sleep at night. So until they recognize that they work for people, and we don't want them looking like military officials, how do we do that without having so much resistance? And the reason I mentioned your history is because you came here and you stayed here, even though change was hard. How do we do that the other way?
Well, remember, you had a mayoral election where none of this police use of force came up, as I recall, in the papers or anything. There was not an issue between these shootings. So somehow the mayor's election didn't really talk about that issue. I look at it this way, and it has a mindset. Does the chief of police see him or herself as the chief police officer of the police, or does that police chief see him or herself as the chief for the people of the city? And that's what we're seeing right now, because when the change movement starts, when hopefully the president will get this thing moving along a little bit and maybe starting a template for cities. What you haven't heard from yet, which I'm just sensing right now, is the pushback from police unions. Police unions. Because they don't want this. And you see the little pushback in New York when the mayor comes to an officer's funeral, and what do the police officers do? Turn their back on the mayor. He's the chief law enforcement officer of the city of New York, and the union turns the back on him. We see that in Baltimore. The pushback and thinking that more force should have been used in the early disturbances of the Freddie Gray incident. More force should have been used, and the chief forced us and the mayor to back away. I know what it's like to be told to back away. It was just before I walked that community. I was on a tax squad. Buildings are burning on Plymouth Avenue in Minneapolis. We're out there with our shotguns. Shots are being fired. Buildings are burning. We're going to make a sweep through the community. We're all ready to go. I'm telling you, I come home. I'm ready to go. Our commander says, "Chief just called. Stand down." Boy, was I mad. Was I mad? Oh, and guess what? I ended up, the mayor of the city was Arthur Knapton at the time, and when I got into graduate school, he was one of my professors. And I told him it was the best decision he ever made. Because if we were told to go down the street, a lot of people dead, just like would have happened in Baltimore. There would have been a lot of people dead. And there wouldn't necessarily be people who wore uniforms either. So those are some of the issues. But I think that we're just going to have to agitate. You know, that's what I like about YGB, is that they're agitating out there. Because elected officials, you know, they're not going to listen to you unless you agitate. I mean, that's American politics. That's what works. And until this continues to be agitated, that we need to have, and what the agenda is for the agitation. And even though YGB talks about community control of police, which is what, for those of us who are older, that's Black Panther philosophy. That's what the Black Panthers were up to. We don't like what you're doing here, you're shooting us, let us control our own community, stay out. That should not be new to us to hear that. And whether or not that's going to happen or not, it still might mean some movement into having more voices heard within the community. And that's why I'm a big fan of agitation. Of course, I don't like to get agitated myself, I'll tell you that. But I've learned to take agitation fairly well over the years. And in Madison, I've been agitated by experts.
Back to the gun issue. Why aren't tasers used instead of guns?
Pardon me?
Tasers. Why are not tasers used instead of guns?
Well, tasers were, after my time, I think they changed a lot about policing, about, well, we got the taser. So some departments have policies that, because officers don't think they work all the time, especially if people have bulky clothes on in cold climates and all that. So it's not considered to be effective. So it probably isn't used as often as it should. And some departments have a policy that you've got to have 2 officers there before you use the taser. And then that causes some problems. Yes, over there, right? Whoever's got the talking stick,
I actually was going to ask you about the YGB request for community control of the police, and if you see a way that there could be some kind of community boards that would have input on police policies, some hiring and firing kinds of things that are being asked for. And then I actually had a second question. I heard, and I don't know if it's true, that one of the issues with police using deadly force is that a police officer is, if they use their weapon, they are required to shoot to kill. And if so, where does that come from and how do we change that?
That's a good question. So it used to start out, you used to shoot once. 1960 when I started. Oh, boy, that sounds a long time ago. I probably weren't born by now. So 1960, shoot. If I shoot somebody, you shoot once. And then came the idea, well, that wasn't working very good. Sometimes people we shoot once and then so we shoot twice. And then over the years, it's kind of increased. And then all the time shooting center body mass, which of course where all the organs are, and that is really the kill zone in the human body is the center mass that police now train on and use. And then there became sort of, my wife stayed in policing after I retired, where it was emptying your entire clip till the threat was stopped. So that's why we're getting a lot of these multiple round shooting things going on. Now, there is another way, and this does not make me popular with police, but this is not just my crazy idea. Some European departments have figured out, I think in the Czech Republic and a few other ones, that there are 2 types of shooting. There's deadly and non-deadly. Deadly shooting is center mass. Less than deadly shooting is where? The legs. So if we have these situations with people with dives and stuff, if they were just shot in the legs, and you can say it's terrible they got shot and everything, but the officer was fearful anyway, they're still alive. They're still alive. And a life has not been taken. So I think, amongst other devising strategies to take down a person with a knife who's not complying without shooting them, police can do that. They have the capacity to do that. They ask me what to do. I know what to do, but I'm not telling them. Okay, they need to think about this themselves. There's ways out there, instrumentality that can be done to that. And the other way is to say that in situations where we have to use force, but we don't want to use deadly force, and we need to stop somebody, we can shoot them in the legs. Now that violates, 40 years of police training in this country. But if everybody says, we want you to stop killing us, maybe we can make some changes. Well, what that has to say, yes, sir.
Yeah, it's been some years ago, but there was an incident up on campus. It seems that the students were protesting, though not very loudly, over the fact that the campus department had gone out and gotten military surplus M16s. I agreed with them. I thought, hey, a campus police department, who needs a fully automatic rifle, for God's sake? I'm just wondering, do you think this over-militarization of weapon systems available to departments are affecting the mindset of officers?
Well, it certainly could. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I remember years ago I was in Newfoundland, up in St. John's, and the Newfoundland police in Canada were not carrying weapons, even though police in the larger cities in Toronto and Montreal were. And so I was talking with a couple of the constables up there about that, and they said, well, I said, what do you do? This is a big hunting area up here. You got that national park, hunter people, guns. You know, we've got a lot of guns in town. Well, tell me what you do when somebody gets called about somebody getting crazy with a gun or something. Well, we go up to their house and we stand out and we say, okay, you got a gun out there, you don't want us to go get our guns, so let's stop it right now. Because if we go back to the station to get our guns, there's going to be in big trouble. Okay, got that? Got that? Standing behind cover, got that? Okay, all right, oh well. So, but see, that would be one way that these. See, that's what fear has done to us. So the rifles used to be back at the station. Now the rifles are in the trunk of the squad cars, and that changes the context a lot. Just like when police are sent out to police a protest, their first action can't be getting up in flexible body armor and helmets and going out there. Their first action has to be, well, what's going on out here? Well, let me tell you. I mean, we've had a lot of demonstrations. I can say this now because I've been 21 years, we never lost a demonstration in the city. One never went bad. We spent a lot of effort doing that, putting police officers in less than military garbs, or special operations unit had the option of wearing just a blazer and slacks as their duty uniform. Makes a big difference when you contact a police officer who's in a blazer and slacks than one that looks like he just got off the boat from the latest military operation.
Would you define YGB?
Oh, young, gifted, and black. It's a group of younger African American students who have been very active in the community after the Tony Robinson shooting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I try not to use acronyms. Thank you. But it's a bit of a national movement too.
I realize it now.
Yeah,
but
if
I
you
couldn't
Google
come up
that.
with- all I could come up with was young girls and boys.
Young girls on bikes.
And then,
That reminded me of my last night at work, that I actually got flashed by a bunch of nude bicycles coming down State Street when I was working. I don't think they knew that was my last night at work, but that was quite the event. Yes, sir.
The other aspect of militarization of the police force that I wanted you to address is not so much the hardware issue, but it seems from the publicity that we've heard over the last 6 months or so, in many cases it's been former military personnel involved in these incidents. And I'm just wondering how common it is for military to go into police as a second career, and if police forces are to a large degree populated now by military. And my point is simply that there are obvious reasons why it might be good to have former military in the police, but I can think of some really bad reasons too. And it goes to the whole issue of how do you interact with the public These guys are used to giving commands and receiving commands and no messing around, and you're going to do this, and if you don't do it, sort of attitude.
Yeah.
And
Good question.
And how, to what extent can that be addressed in their training?
Well, I've had some bad personal experiences with people that I've worked with who were in the Korean War and World War II, who were damaged people. But we didn't know about PTSD then, or traumatic brain injury. We didn't know much about that. I was a little hesitant and was very careful in hiring Vietnam vets that were coming back. If I had it, I really was worried just in the last couple of years, the president talked about, well, when we stand down in Iraq and Afghanistan, we can put these men and women into policing. Gave me a little bit of a start. There's really not a lot similar between being, like I was a Marine. I mean, I think about the only thing that I gained from that is I had a good familiarity with weapons and being an urban police officer. Sue Rahr, who was a former sheriff in King County, Seattle, was our keynote speaker down in Platteville last week. And she's in charge of all police training in the state of Washington. She has a really positive attitude about a couple of major points to me, that police are guardians and not warriors. And she takes from the guardian the concept that Plato talked about, that the very best people in our society are the protectors, are the guardians of the state, of the republic. She also believed something I strongly believed in and wrote about in my book, is that this idea of running police academies as boot camps is wrong, wrong, wrong. Half of all police in the United States are trained in what they call a stress-related training environment. For Sue Rahr, it was that when she came on as the director of state training there, that she would have anywhere from 300 to 400 police from all over the state of Washington coming through training, in which they would have to, like the military, brace when anybody walked by. And she said, we're not going to do that anymore. But what we need to do is look the person in the eye and say, good morning, how are you today? And interact with the person. And she said even after about a week of that, the whole atmosphere of the academy changed. Because if we're going to get people who are academics, who have college degrees, they're not going to want to go through that type of harassing. And if you do, think about that. If you do that, what does that say to the police officer about how that person might treat the public? So I was out doing some training in Las Vegas a number of years ago, and it was for the command staff on leadership, and I got out there early. It turned out that the classroom was out at the academy. So I got out there early, and I'm watching things, and they've got police officers lined up. And they're doing an inspection, and it kind of reminded me of my old Marine Corps days. And they're kind of really harassing people, making them do push-ups, and calling them assholes. So when the chief and the staff got in for the training, I said, well, I got here a little early, so you're training. Question: Is it against your policy, for a Las Vegas officer to call a citizen an asshole? Well, of course it is. Why do you say that? Well, if you look out the window, that's how you're training them. Because that's how we're training them out there. So the training is so important. And if we have an atmosphere that's harassing and bullying, you're teaching police officers to be harassing persons and bullying persons, rather than treating them respectfully as you expect them to treat the public. All of that is not rocket science. It really isn't. But to break the culture, extremely difficult. It's going to take generations to really move the police to where I think, and I think most of you think, they should be today. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a change in attitude. It's not bad cops out there doing bad things. It's cops out there doing exactly as they've been trained. And that's the scary part of it. If it was just bad cops, we can get rid of the bad cops after a while. Except in large cities where they're protected by all kinds of clauses and you can't fire anybody. As the commissioner in Philadelphia fired a whole bunch of crooked cops and they all got returned by the review board into ranks. And I don't know if that's why Chuck Ramsey is going to retire this year, but it might be a very good reason why he is.
Question here?
What about the responsibility of the community in self-policing, self-responsibility, self-examination, and better communication with their own friends, neighbors, family, and so on, working with the police?
Well, that's absolutely essential. I mean, this isn't, the police just aren't going to change unless you help them change. And that means, you've got to stand up and say, look, what do you need? Let me help you change. I mean, I think that every police department in the country ought to take there's about 14 or 16 recommendations from the President's Task Force on 21st century policing that apply to local units of government. And I think that local units of government ought to walk into the mayor's office and say, hey, Mayor, there's this report here. How is the police department doing? Now, down at the Platteville conference, there were a couple of command officers that got sent down there, and I had some discussion with them, and one of them was very, very concerned. And that captain of the department and the person said to me, he said, I think we've been doing all these things for years, and I think we're doing all the right. Why is there such mistrust out there? And the answer I had is, are you really as close to the community as you should? Do you know those YGB kids? Do you really know what makes them tick? How culturally competent are we? I mean, we've been through all kinds of migration. We're just talking about the Marilitos coming into to Madison. Remember the stabbing out in the square? My gosh, somebody got eviscerated out there. I mean, everybody was going crazy. So we got MATC, we got some English classes, we sent police officers in there to teach them these are the standards. This is how you behave in Madison, Wisconsin, the United States. Is you cannot grab the bottoms of women that are walking by. It's not acceptable. And if you do, you will be charged with a 4th-degree sexual assault. And then you'll be in big trouble. And the same thing when the Hmongs came here. I mean, we had a lot of discussion. Well, remember when wives were being stolen from Minneapolis, and we had to send officers in there, some very sensitive female detectives saying, you can't do that. That's considered kidnapping in this culture. How do we work this thing through? How do we handle this in a better way? And I think the community has done a fairly good job of integrating a lot of diverse groups into here. But it's not, it's not, those of us who call ourselves white, I love that term. It comes from Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book, Beyond the World and Me. Wonderful book. I've asked some black friends of mine, they don't think it's a very good book. I don't know why. I think it's a good book for white people. Between the World and Me. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about those of you who think you're white. We have a way in which we think. We have that's a lot different. We're going to be in the minority pretty soon. What is it, about 25 or so? We better start being nice to diverse people around here because, we're going to be in the minority. Our days are numbered. Our days are numbered, so maybe we should make the best use of the time we have right now, and that we can all be civil to one another, respectful to one another, and help each other. Because it's going to take a whole community to make this happen. And just by bitching at the police is not going to get them to change. And I think I've got to say to your alders, to the mayor, that hey, we want to help this happen. There's a lack of trust, whether or not the Madison Police Department has earned that or not. There is a lack of trust out there. We need to know what that level is empirically. We need to know these data. And then when we start doing things, we can see whether or not what we're doing is helping or not helping. And one thing is not going to help this community is another questionable shooting. It's not going to help. And the point is, I talked to a number of chiefs down in Illinois a few months ago, I said, every one of you are one incident away from a major crisis in your city. You know, it doesn't make any difference what the size of your department. If an officer shoots somebody, which a large percentage of your community that you serve thinks is wrong, or as I have been told time and time again, you need to, those of us who are white need to ask our friends who are African American, say, how do they see the Tony Robinson shooting? You know how they think it's an execution, right? That's what I hear. And this isn't young people saying this. These are senior members of our community that lived here for many, many years. When I was at Tony Robinson's funeral at East High School, I heard a prominent African-American pastor had the benediction say that we might rectify this murder of this boy. Murder of this boy. We know we've got a big gap here to overcome. And I think we can do it. It's not going to be easy, and that's a sense of, put my 2 cents in about what is it that you're called to do? Where does your passion meet the world's need? And for me, 10 years out of policing, I found my passion was still to try to improve police. And of course, when you're outside of the field, and you think you need to improve them, it is not always a very happy relationship. It's not always very friendly. But I feel called to do this as much as I felt called to leave the police and go into the ministry, because I think social justice you don't have to be a religious person to believe in social justice. You just have to be a decent person. That's all it takes. And there's a lot of decent people around this community, and I think we can do something. Any way I can help, I will. And are we coming to the end, or what do you think?
More.
You did work on
You mentioned, I think in addition to the implicit bias that especially white people tend to carry around, you pointed out what I think is a real big issue in our country right now is this whole culture of fear. And I wondered if you could speak to how you see how communities of faith could help try to change that culture of fear that we're...
They're not. I mean, in my tradition, what would Jesus say all the time? He's talking about fearing not. I mean, he knew what was going on. I mean, we all have our fears. And that's when the implicit bias comes out. I mean, we're fearing of people we don't know. We have this fear. We're worried about them. I mean, those of us who are white who grew up in this society, we have biases. In fact, most people have biases. But, I mean, I don't know about you, I've got to check my biases all the time. I check them all the time. You've got to be a little voice back in your... When I see a black guy running through a white community, I'm telling you, my first reaction is, what's he doing here? What's he doing here? Now, do I act on that? If I do, I'm lost. Then I'm part of the problem. If I say, whoa, slow back. Oh, yeah, that's where he lives. Or my Japanese professor friend out in California was working in his front yard. He's doing some trimming of the trees, and his neighbor walks by and said, "Oh, you do such a nice job." I said, "Well, thank you very much. Are you available to do my yard?" What'd you say? So I mean, we all have these stereotypes, but do we act on them? It's not. I mean, I remember one of my officers was talking to him years ago, very, very large African-American male, and we were kind of just talking about stuff, and he says, the other day I'd go up to the top floor of the city county building, it was a weekend, and I was on duty, he's he's in plain clothes. He said, I'm going to push the elevator there, and up the elevator comes this white woman in on the elevator. And she looks at me, and I look at her, and I said, oh, I guess I'm going up. She opened the door. Encounter. Of course, that probably goes on to a certain extent with all males. If you're a single female in the elevator, it's dark, and there's nobody in the building, and somebody comes up, do you get in the elevator or not? He chose not to get on the elevator because he did not want to make her uncomfortable. But see, I don't even think much about that.
And what you just said, those are some of those examples. They're all part of the underlying problems that have gone from one generation all the time. And I think that, like you talked about, we were talking about the police and the guns, and it comes all the way back to trust. And, for years, people of color people look on them as, oh, that's somebody to be scared of, So I think when you're walking the street, and especially in an area like Madison, where it's predominantly white, I guess statistics would make it seem as though it is the worst place in the country. But I don't know if I can say that that is true, because it's predominantly white. So, but it's all over, and it is so deep, that we're just getting all the examples of the mistreatment from the police. And sometimes, I look at a situation like all the problems that we had with young black men, and it is painful, Sometimes you're watching the TV and you see the police, maybe the person is down on the ground, and yet they're being caked, and for another black person watching that, I don't, for me, when I watch it, I feel really bad. I feel like we don't belong, no one likes us. So, there's so many problems. I don't, it's hard to tell where to begin from, how to solve all these problems.
Yeah.
But it's painful when, I don't have sons, but I have daughters. But, and it's very, it's very emotional for me. I usually don't like to talk too much about it, unless, it's in a particular setting like this. But if I had a son, I would probably have to, every morning before he leaves home, I would probably have to say, make sure when you go out, you don't do this, you speak nicely to everybody, and because this is just how it is for most black moms and dads. They have to constantly warn their sons, especially, to behave when they're out in the street, otherwise you'll be killed. And it's just so confusing. Why do we have to live like that? But it's a problem that has been going on for years and centuries and stuff, where we're looked on as though we're from a different planet, we don't belong because of our color. So, I know that we want to try to make things better here in Madison, and I know the police and all that, that's one part of it, but it is so deep. How do we, the question is, where do we begin from, and how do we try to change something that's so, under the skin of everybody?
So a point that was very critical for me was after Tony Robinson was shot, and I had some contact with Pastor Everett Mitchell, Christ the Solid Rock Church on the east side. And so there was a community meeting just after that in his church, and I found out there was a web stream of that meeting. and I sat at home and watched that web stream of Madison black women, one after another, coming up to the microphone and saying they feared for the lives of their children. Feared for the lives of their children. And I'm watching that, and I say, God, what's happened? I mean, has it always been the feeling here? Has it always been this frightened of the police? I don't know, but that was so raw. It was stunning to me. You think, well, maybe a few people would say, oh, they must have just come up from Chicago, have those feelings. No. Well, there are women who were born here in Madison, Wisconsin, had children here, and those talking about their 14-year-old son who's 6 foot tall, and he's just a boy, and I'm afraid he's going to be killed, is not a worry most of us who think we're white have on a daily basis. We just don't think about that. And, well, press on. That's what I say, press on. Who said that? Say, press on.
David, thank you so much.